This is the Topo Specter 2. It's got a full pebax midsole and an anatomical toe box. But is it just good for a wide shoe, or is it good, period? It's time to lace up the Specter 2 and take it for a run. Yo, what's going on? My name is Kofuzi and I'm a non-elite runner who reviews running shoes here on YouTube, and today I want to talk to you guys all about the Topo Specter 2. Before I give you my thoughts on this shoe, I do want to go over some disclosures. This is a shoe that Topo sent to me for the purpose of review, so I did not have to pay for these shoes. However, nobody's paying me to make this video or to include their shoe in this video, and no one's going to get a chance to preview any of my footage or my thoughts before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. So with that disclosure out of the way, let's talk about the Topo Specter 2, and let's start with the specs. This is a 37mm stack height shoe with a 5mm drop, giving us 32mm of stack height in the forefoot. Now in this shoe, there's only one thing in this midsole, and that's pebax. They've got it written right on the side of the shoe here. This is a beaded peba foam, similar to what we've seen in shoes from Saucony and from Tyr. This is a high-end racing foam, but unlike those other two brands, Topo does not put any carbon fiber plates in their shoes, so this is purely just beaded peba foam and nothing else. And this is an upgrade from last year's initial Topo Specter, which I didn't have a chance to review, but that had a pebax core or an insert that went inside an EVA carrier. Now, to protect all the pebax that's in the Specter 2, we do have some strategically placed rubber, and it's not too thick. I appreciate that they didn't try to make it a very thick layer of rubber that's on here. It's pretty thin, and there is some exposed foam here to help shed some weight and also help the shoe to bend a little bit easier. Now, something that's notable about the shape of the shoe is not only is it wide in the forefoot to accommodate that anatomical or foot-shaped toe box, there's also a pretty wide flare in the heel back here. Not only is it wide, but it's also pretty stout. It goes up pretty tall and extends pretty far back from the back of the heel. It does have a pretty aggressive heel bevel on the backside to help those of you who are more of heel strikers, and it is one of the more prominent design features that I see on the shoe, mainly because of the fact that the design and the kind of striations that they tried to put in the back of the heel, even out of the box, looked like they were a little bit rough and ragged. So I'm not sure that that's a design that quite works with this beaded peba formulation that they have in the Topo Specter 2, but to the extent that it might look a little bit messy, it's purely cosmetic. Now, talking more about that anatomical foot shape, there is quite a bit of width to the forefoot of the shoe. You're definitely not going to get your toes crunched in here. And for those of you who do have a wider foot, maybe you tend to size up in a lot of shoes, or maybe you only run in shoes that are available in wide sizes. This is a shape that you're going to appreciate, and it's going to be one of the few speed-oriented shoes that's available for you on the market that you don't have to size up for. Me personally, I normally go with a running shoe of size 9, that's reference size. I went with that here and it fit fantastic for me, as every other Topo shoe that I've tried has been. The mesh that's used in the upper here feels very much like a daily training upper, and that kind of sets the tone for this shoe as well, because while it does have a full pebax midsole, it doesn't have a plate, and it's not intended to be a racing shoe per se. Topo is not marketing it as a racing shoe. They're marketing it more as a long run shoe that can go quickly. It does have that pebax, that racing caliber foam in it. And I think that the upper kind of like lets you know that as well, as this is built a little bit more for durability than it is for pure performance or racing. There is a very small amount of padding in the tongue. It's a soft tongue, but it's not puffy by any means. And there is a light amount of padding throughout the heel cup. But what I do like about this heel cup is that it is very floppy. I don't personally like it when there's a lot of armor or plastic or other hard pieces or clips that are in back of the shoe. So it fits really well. It's very comfortable to be in this shoe, not only from an upholstery perspective, but also because of the size. Now, altogether, Topo tells us that this shoe comes in at a weight of 8.1 ounces or 229 grams. Now that we've talked about what the shoe is like on paper, let's talk about what the shoe is like on foot. The Topo Specter 2 is a speedy long run shoe with plenty of comfort. And like I mentioned earlier, if you've got a wide or a slightly wide foot, you don't have as many speedy options as the rest of us do, but this one I feel like is going to work for you without having to go to a wide size or without having to size up. The pebax on this shoe is responsive and quick, and there's plenty of pushback in the foam when you're running at speed. But for me personally, at kind of daily training speeds or at easy and recovery run paces, I feel like the shoe is a little bit on the firm side. However, that firmness might be really appreciated by some of my bigger and taller friends. For you guys at daily training efforts, this shoe might be just about perfect. I also find that the shoe is pretty stable for a shoe that has this much pebax in it, and a lot of that is going to come from that width and that geometry, which gives you plenty of space to land on in the forefoot and in the heel, and that space prevents the shoe from caving in too quickly like a little bit more narrow of a shoe would using racing foams. And I feel like that heel bevel, especially for those of you who are heel strikers, is going to give you a nice wide target to land on, make it easier for you to transition from that heel strike into your toe off. For me personally, I'm not really hitting the back of the shoe all that much with the way that my foot tends to hit the ground, especially when I'm trying to move a little bit faster. But because the shoe is pretty light at 8.1 ounces, I find that that extra stuff that's in the back of the heel really doesn't bother me at all. I do find that the lack of a plate here makes me wanting something else for a workout that's a little bit more on the tough side. But overall, I find that personally, this is a very agreeable shoe that I can use at a pretty wide variety of pace and effort ranges. And so I think that this isn't just a good shoe for wide footers. I think it's a good shoe. Now, before we wrap up the video, let's zoom out for a moment and see where the Topo Specter 2 fits in with the broader Topo lineup. Now, personally, I'm not the most familiar with Topo. I only started running in them about a year, maybe 2 years ago. So my experience is limited. And normally I always like to tell you guys that I start with a daily trainer when I'm trying to understand a brand. I actually haven't run in the daily trainer from Topo, but they have sent me their max cushion shoe to take a look at. And this is the Atmos. And this is a shoe that I've been really enjoying. And the best shoe that I can compare it to is the Bondi. If the Bondi kind of started moving in a direction that I wish the Bondi would go, I feel like the Bondi has been pretty kind of stagnant for the last couple of years. This has a little bit of updates to a Bondi that make me really like it as a max cushion or a recovery run shoe, but certainly you could do a lot of your easy running miles in it. Now, where I would bring the Topo Specter 2 in is I would put it as my long run shoe on this side of my kind of easy and recovery run efforts. So this is a shoe that I would also really be happy to be in for a long amount of hours, but for something that I wanted to run a little bit faster in, that's where I would reach for the Topo Specter 2. I'm really gonna think of that for those really long runs that have some speedy miles, but not my speediest miles. For that, I would reach for the Topo Cyclone 2. This is also a full pebax midsole, but it doesn't have a plate, and it has that 5mm drop and an anatomical toe box. So this is the shoe that I would use for the fastest stuff that I have available. Now, Topo doesn't exactly have a racing shoe in its lineup, doesn't have anything that's carbon fiber plated, but if I were to do some racing and I wanted to do it in a Topo, I would probably pick either the Cyclone 2 or the Spectre 2, depending on the distance and the intensity of that road race. But these are the Topo shoes that I've had a chance to review and how I think that they relate to each other. Now let's wrap up the video by talking about the buying guide, and we'll also go into some alternatives. The Topo Specter 2 is a comfortable long run shoe that can do just about a bit of everything, but is at its best when you're putting in a little bit of speed. You might be able to get a discount on last year's Topo Specter 1, but given the upgrades to the midsole going from a pebax insert to a full pebax midsole, I'd say that it's really going to be worth your time and effort to get to that 165 of the Topo Specter 2. And at $165 for what you're getting in this shoe, I feel like that's a really great price. But let's take a look at some of the alternatives in the market so you can see what that 165 gets you. Now, when I talk about long run shoes, in other words, shoes that can be used as daily trainers, might be considered max cushion shoes, but that I think that are best when you have a long run with some speedy miles put in there. The usual suspects are like Super Blast or Invincible 3, shoes that are in that kind of $200 range. But if you're looking at the Topo Specter 2, you're probably also looking at some other shoes as well, and I want to address those that I think are also really well priced and provide similar levels of performance. So first, let's take a look at the offering from Tyr, and that's the Valkyrie Speedworks. This is another shoe that has what they claim an anatomical toe box, but also uses a beaded pebax foam. So the same type of foam that Topo is using in their shoe. And this shoe does have a plate in it, which you could see through this little window in the midsole here, but it is a nylon plate. So it's not as aggressive and not as rigid as a carbon fiber plate is going to be. And I feel like the main difference between these two shoes is going to be that the Speedworks is a little bit more geared towards workouts and running at speed. Even though they say it is an anatomical toe box, it's not nearly as wide across the foot as the Topo Specter 2 is. And also when looking at the geometry or the footprint of the shoe, it's not nearly as wide either in the forefoot or in the heel as the Specter 2 is. So it's going to be a little bit narrower, both in the upper and also in the footprint as well. So if you need the width, go with the Specter 2. But if you want something that's a little bit more traditional speed work oriented, go with the Speedworks. And that shoe comes in at $170, so $10 more to get to the Speedworks, which I also think is a pretty good price for what you're getting there. Now, the next shoe that I want to talk about is a shoe that I haven't reviewed yet. It's in the pipeline, but I also want to talk about now because when you're talking and looking at Topos, you're probably looking at other things than the usual suspects that I normally talk about on the channel. And so now I want to talk about a shoe from Under Armour, which is a brand that hasn't appeared on this channel in a while, and that's the Under Armour Infinite Elite. Now, this shoe uses a beaded foam. I don't think it's pebax. I'm waiting for a response from Under Armour on it. I believe it's a beaded TPU type of foam in there, but it is a lightweight styrofoamy kind of shoe that has some cushion and a lot of bounce to it. And it's another shoe that I think works really well for long runs, especially if you got to put some speed into it. I'd say that the main difference between these two shoes is that the Under Armour Infinite Elite has a much chunkier upper. It has more puffiness and padding in the tongue and in through the heel cup. And then there's a lot of just chunky plastic elements that are going on in the heel. Whereas in terms of stability through the ankle and on the foot, Topo is using more of the footprint of the shoe and the width of this heel bevel back here in order to keep your foot where it's supposed to be. The Under Armour Infinite Elite is also quite a bit heavier, but you get a discount for carrying all that weight around because that shoe comes in at a very well priced $160. So those are my thoughts on the Topo Specter 2. Let me know in the comments if you have any other questions about this shoe or any of the shoes that I talked about today, or better yet, stop by the live stream that I do over on the Kofuzi Run Club channel Mondays and Thursdays. I'd love to talk to you guys over there in the chat. That's all for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I'll see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?